What is up, podheads? Back with another episode of the Podioslave podcast. My name is Tony. I'm joined, as always, by Anthony. And
Hey.
do you remember those rental zone commercials? This is super main lore right now, but do you remember those rental zone commercials when we were kids?
Rental zone? No.
Yeah. Step into the 90s, step into the rental zone. This is a place that you could, like, rent a TV, rent a flat screen TV, and pay it off as you go.
Like a rent-a-center?
Yeah, similar to that in Maine. But yeah, it was those commercials. Step into the 90s, step into the rental zone. And tonight we're stepping into the 90s. So yeah.
How about the rental? Are we stepping in the rental zone too, or no?
Well, we rented a podcast host, so yes.
We did. Oh man, I had a blast with tonight's episode. This is one that I feel like has been 20 years in the making, which I know doesn't make sense because we just started the podcast 4 years ago. But I feel like
But it was, yeah.
The seed was planted when I had realistically probably an unhealthy affinity to 90s hardcore, in post-hardcore and metalcore, all that stuff, where I just kind of dived in. And a lot of it stems from missing it. It's the FOMO. Like if I miss something, of course I'm going to, have an affinity towards it. Yeah, deep dive it. So countless hours reading books and on boards and things like that, and digging into 90s hardcore music. Like I always had a affinity for it. And then being from Maine had a poppin' hardcore scene in the 90s. And I was 2 or 3, 4 or 5 years removed from that. So I missed it. So it was always, that FOMO. So we been deep diving it for years. So we thought, hey, let's do a 90s hardcore episode. I still listen to a ton of these records. I still listen to every week. I listen to Strife, Snapcase, Earth Crisis, Indecision, all these bands. So it makes sense. It took 5 years. How long were we doing this? 5 years?
Pushing 5. Yeah, we're getting closer and closer to 5 every day, which is wild. But yes, it took almost 5 years to get to this point to be able to do an episode like this. And early days we wouldn't have been able to pull this off. So our guest, Tom Sheehan of the Axe to Grind podcast, Indecision, a million different bands, right? He was more than game, and I can't wait to have him back after this combo. So it was a blast. We got some insight on some stuff that we just weren't able to live, even though we kind of saw some stuff as kids. We weren't able to live it and know what it was like in his shoes, playing in a band in the 90s, touring the U.S., showing up to the tiny towns in some of those states that don't get a ton of shows, and playing to 7 people. And how did that happen? We just didn't know how any of that stuff was to be. So we got the story tonight, got the lowdown tonight.
I get a lot of legacy questions answered, how did this go down when this sound came in? How was this label perceived? All that stuff. Tom was our number 1 draft pick for this episode, and we made it happen. Tom Sheehan, episode 200 and whatever it is. You clicked on it, Let's go. All right, him from Indecision, Most Precious Blood, Colossus, giantly underrated, hugely underrated band. Love Colossus.
Thank you.
And he's one of the hosts of a top 2 podcast for me in Axe to Grind. Tom Sheehan is in the house.
Thank you so much for that. What's number 1? I'm curious.
Yeah,
I want to ask, and I'm not pandering. I am not pandering because I know you're a huge fan. The Joe Budden podcast.
I love Joe Budden. That was who we were going for in the beginning. I was supposed to be Joe Budden of of the 3. I was supposed to be the cranky old guy, and I was like, I like this music more than anybody. So
Bob was Rory and Patrick was Ma.
That actually kind of works, unfortunately. We stuck together though, so it was fine.
There you go.
Yeah.
I love that podcast. I listen to it audio and then I watch the video. I'm that obsessed.
Oh, you're that much of a fan.
And I've seen it live. I saw them at I think it was the Wilbur Theater back when it was Rory and Ma.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah. I listened to the one yesterday and today about Diddy, which was interesting.
I gotta listen to that.
It's like, cool, and
yeah. That was a good one. I did listen to that one.
This is gonna come out, probably 10 days from when we're recording it, so some other shoes will have dropped, I'm sure, but
which is so crazy when you do this sort of stuff. You're like, Diddy could be several terrible things could happen between now and then. It's almost like you can't say anything of any timeliness because the world moves fast.
It does. Yep.
Yeah.
Especially with that story. Like, it's funny. It took 25
insane.
years and it moved so slow, and now it's all out there, and it's going to come out. All the narratives online are like, shit's still going to hit the fan.
Yep.
Yeah, and like whether or not he comes out against other people. And I know he's like sharing living space with Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yeah, I saw that.
I was like, and I know where the jail is because it's near where I grew up as a kid in Brooklyn. And it's like in the middle of nowhere. It's like off the Brooklyn Queens Expressway, like closer to the water. Hope he's in protective custody because I know what happens the last time someone who had a list of people was in there. They ended up dead. So like,
allegedly, all alleged. Right?
Oh yes,
exactly.
of course. Sorry. Yes.
So come for 90s hardcore. Stay for the Diddy narrative. I love this. This is
how do we end up?
If you had this on your bingo card, you just won. But so yeah, Tom, this episode, it's one that I've wanted to do. Tony, we wanted to do since we started the podcast. It's focused on 90s hardcore and adjacent because
Sure.
and that's a Bob Shed special adjacent. But it's one that we wanted to do, and we could do it on our own, Tony and I. But the thing is, we weren't there for it. I'm 39, Tony's 40. We missed it. We just missed it. So we wanted to have, and in my head, I thought of like 3 criteria of someone to join us. 1, someone that lived it. You check that box.
Right.
2, someone that was in a band in that era. You check that box. And 3, someone that's still into it. You live it. You're into it. I listen to you every week talking about it. So you're still on top of it. I don't want some old head that hasn't been around for a while.
Right.
So basically, it was either you or Bob, and I think and you won. So congrats, you're here with us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little older than him, so I have like
a
little bit more. Yeah, it's true. He did have a lot of music stuff though, but yeah, he was the one guy that wasn't in the band from the podcast.
Yeah.
So, or he was, but like very briefly, very early.
So yeah, you were the first, I think the first pick when Anthony texted me like, this is the one I want to do. We gotta do this now. Now's the time. So
I appreciate that. That's great.
Yeah, excited to kind of chop up about stuff that again we just weren't old enough to be at the shows. We were old enough to be paying attention to music. It's when we fell in love with it.
Sure.
But we weren't at stuff in '95 because I was 11 and Anthony was 10. So.
Yeah, that would do it. Yeah, that would do it.
We weren't Freddie Madball.
There's a very few folks that got there that early.
Yeah. But we get some questions about touring, some questions about shows, some questions about the scene, just kind of stuff that'll jog your memory, hopefully, and you can, feel free to go on a tangent.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, you can give me like the wrap it up sign from like your pal,
Yeah.
Well, it's funny we're doing this. Like 90s, it must be in the air because the Axe to Grind episode that came out yesterday at the time of recording was 90s. So I was like, he's primed and ready to go for this.
And we recorded that Monday night, and like Bob came up with the idea like literally like 3 hours or 2 hours before we recorded. It was like, we're gonna talk about this. We were like, oh boy. And then I go in and start Googling and making sure I hit everything. And Pat's like, I didn't prepare at all. I'm like, yeah.
So the dynamic of your podcast in this podcast, it's almost identical because we have a third host that comes and goes.
Right.
And he is Patrick. He is the wild card.
You never know what you're going to get.
Oh, you don't even know if he's going to show up.
Well, Pat's also good like that, too. It's like he won't respond to text. And I'm like, is he actually going to show up? And he does. Invariably, he shows up. But it's always like, he keeps you guessing. And I think he's like, I always joke that he's like the straw that stirs the drink. Because he's the one who says stuff that gets us talking. And mostly him and I arguing about politics and everything else. But
Nate would do that for us every now and then too, because he'd say something and I'd be like, I don't know. I don't think you know what the fuck you're talking about, dude. I'm jumping in on this.
Well, he's some food analogy. That's like,
oh, he was very good.
It kind of works.
Food and movies. Yeah, I do miss those.
So, Tom, one of the things that I know you did a fair amount of that I've always had like such a fascination with from the 90s, just from like pre-internet, pre-GPS, probably pre-booking agents, but like booking shows and touring. So the year's 95, let's say. How's Indecision? Let me ask you this. How did the Indecision Silent Majority Millhouse tour get booked?
So then, actually, funny enough, we had a booking agent.
Wow, even back then.
Yeah, who's actually still a booking agent and an agent now. Went on to far cooler things than the 3 bands you mentioned. She works for like Hot Water Music, and I think she like the Promise Ring. She did a bunch of cool stuff.
Oh wow.
but even before that, like we would book it ourselves, and it was sort of, there's a book called, there was a book, I think it probably still exists, but it's probably on the internet only, called Book Your Own Fucking Life.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That you can kind of, you like, people would put their contact information in, and then you could be like, I need a show in Toledo. There you go. All right, I'm calling Joe from Toledo, and whatever.
So it's a phone call. It's a phone.
Yeah. Or like, I mean, letters too, but I feel like that was even antiquated by the time we were touring. You know, and then just sort of, you know, bands would come through New York. We'd make contacts with them. Then when we would come through their town, they took us up there. So it just, it's a thing that only exists, I think, in punk and hardcore, to have like this sort of like nationwide network that you don't really need anybody else. You can literally like play everywhere in the United States of America and Canada with a couple of phone calls because you have met them over the years. It's really, I think it's the coolest thing. I think that's something that I miss sort of about like, you know, current day hardcore.
Do you know anything about the venues at all?
Like where we played?
Yeah, like so the tour's booked. You get this, you know, Joe's Cafe in Toledo. Do you know anything about the venues?
Most of the time, not really, unless it was somewhere we had already been. Because even then, I mean, there was no YouTube, there was no Hate 5-6. So it wasn't like, oh, I've seen videos from this place. You know, it was just kind of like, oh, we're just showing up, and hopefully, like, oh, it's this random VFW hall. Oh, it's like someone's basement. You know, like we've played shows that like we just like shows that like if you looked at the lineup now, you'd be like, oh, this, like the one I always talk about. And when you said go on tangents, I'm going to go on tangent already.
Yeah,
on that tour, 1998, it was Indecision, Silent Majority, Millhouse on tour. Our tour met up with Dillinger Escape Plan, Botch, and Jesuit.
That's an arena show, Tom. No,
it was in a basement in Columbus, Ohio, called the Legion of Doom, and it was pretty much the bands playing for each other. Maybe
Jesus.
50 people. You know what I mean? And you look at it now, you're like, oh, like Botch and Dillinger both draw like thousands of people, and we're all being dopes in a basement of somebody's like house in a college town in Ohio, you know? But I think it's just like, it was a lot of hustling, a lot of, you know, connecting to folks and just kind of getting out there.
Well, and having to be probably pretty adaptable, whether it be with your live show, right? Sometimes you're playing this tiny little stage in the basement somewhere, or sometimes you get a little bit more room to operate, or, you know, barricade, no barricade, stuff like that. Like, you just don't know what you're going to get when you walk in the door, right? For some of those new places.
Yeah. And I mean, some places you'll show up and they'll be like, wait, what kind of music are you? And I'll be like, oh, cool. Like,
wait, you didn't check my MySpace?
Yeah. There wasn't one yet.
Sent you a compact disc or a tape. Yeah. I mean, there's been times too, like that would show up and they'd be like, what kind of music? We're like punk, hardcore. They're like, too bad. We had a big punk and hardcore show here last night. I'm like, awesome. Can't wait to struggle through this one. You know?
So I remember in the early 2000s,
right.
We're from Maine. We still live here. There was a venue up in Augusta, Maine, called The Edge, and it was a teen center.
Yes.
And this was like 2003. And I remember going to a show there. It was 1208. Remember that band, 1208?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
1208. They were the headliner. They didn't show up. And like, this was pre-cell phone. So like, the guy that booked the show didn't even know until like after. So
right, like
I envision the 90s just being a shitstorm of that shit.
Oh yeah, like you'd go like, I mean, you wouldn't get the like the tweet the day of being like, so and so had a sickness or whatever, and they're not going to make it tonight. You show up and they go like, I mean, I guess All Out War's not coming. I don't know, maybe I don't know. Like, I mean, it's 11:30, and I want to go home.
Where's
like,
the letter? Weren't they supposed to mail a letter about that?
You know, but like it would happen all the time, and it would just sort of like, you know, you just show up. It was literally it was like the Wild Wild West. Even though it doesn't seem that long ago, but even though it was, I couldn't imagine what like Black Flag and stuff dealt with in the 80s when they had even less ways of communicating. You know, it's
so many less. Yeah. You're not sending like the Pony Express out there to tell people, hey, we're not making it. We have a flat tire. Like, it's just not going to happen tonight.
Like, were there ATMs in the Black Flag days? Probably not.
Right. Yeah. No money. Like, man.
Right. You know what I mean? You're schlepping around whatever money you have and like protecting it like with your body.
Yeah. So in the 90s, my dad was like, he was a real estate agent for like 4 or 5 years. And in that time frame, this was like 94 to 99. He had a car phone, and it was like, my dad, you know, like middle class, but he was balling in his car because he needed one for real estate.
Right.
Did any bands have cell phones?
Not that I remember. I think the first band I remember having a cell phone was this band called Trip Face.
Oh yeah, Trip Face. Yeah.
Right. From Long Island. We were on tour with them in like January of like 97. I remember we broke down and like he had his phone. But I mean, like we were on the side of a road somewhere like in, Florida on like, it was literally New Year's Eve. And he's like trying to get service, like walking around because there was probably like 2 cell towers in all Florida or whatever.
Right, there's none, right?
Yeah, it's not like, I mean, it's cool. It's cool you have that, but it's a brick.
The Zach Morris phone.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it was enormous.
Yep.
Like none of us had like the ball or like tethered to the car phone that your dad had that you were kind of like, let me pull this out of this giant, like
it was like a suitcase.
Right.
That was
Exactly.
in the passenger floor. Like you couldn't even sit there. It was so big.
Right. Yeah, none of the bands until Trip Face was the first band that I knew. But it was one of those things. It's like, don't use this often because it's probably $5 a minute, whatever it was. It was probably some astronomical charge.
Nights and weekends.
Right. If that, So yeah, no, we were just kind of a lot of payphones, a lot of dialers, and just. You guys familiar with dialers?
I was gonna say, first of all, payphones were the thing, right? And then tell us about the tone dialers, right? Because we've heard this story maybe one other time on the podcast, but
okay.
It's
Benny
awesome.
Horowitz.
Benny Horowitz.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, of course. He would know. Yeah, he was good. He was a young guy out around then and kind of was always touring and stuff. Like he booked everybody and kind of toured when he was a child, which is amazing. And he's still doing it. I think he's doing okay. He seems to be doing all right in the 2020s, right? That band's doing all right.
Yeah.
Love Gaslight. So a dialer was something you could buy legally at like Radio Shack. So I think from what I remember, it was like it was almost like you could like put people's phone numbers into it. Like you could program them in there and then you'd be like, I want to call Tony, and you'd hit the button for Tony and it would like hold it up to people that are under 40 listening to this are like, what the
fuck are you talking about?
You put it up to the mouthpiece of the phone and it would dial the numbers for you. So it was like a phone book. It was like a futuristic phone book. But of course, because hardcore and punk people are ingenuous, like really can kind of make, jailbreak anything. They jailbroke it so that it made a sound that sounded like a quarter going into the phone.
Of course, right?
So you go beep, and it would be like, that's 25 cents. And like you can literally call everywhere for nothing as long as you kept hitting the button, and it would the phone itself would register as like quarters and change going in to continue your phone calls.
It's amazing that was the technology that of the day, obviously, that payphones, all you needed was to make that sound for it to think money went in. I thought you like actually had to place money in there to get it to work.
Like it had some kind of weighting thing or something.
Yeah.
Like that wasn't a quarter. No,
nope.
It's
just a sound.
Just a sound.
It's
fascinating.
Man, so that's crazy to me. So that must have been a thing in that era of like touring bands have tone dialers. Like,
oh, it was like everyone. Yeah, I don't know who the first person like was like, we can do here, but like they were like people. I think people probably made their first million selling those to people. Like the first person to figure it out was like, I mean, they were invaluable. If you stopped on the side of a highway, you had some way to call. You could call anywhere. So I mean, I think every band had at least one.
So along with the pre-cell phone, I was trying to think. So I was born in 85. So like, let's just say 98, for example. I was 13. Sure. We had AOL. We had dial-up. But when you're touring, you're not, there's no smartphone, right? So, and there's no GPS that I remember in that era.
No.
So is it Rand McNally Atlas shit?
For the most part, yeah. Yeah. We would have like this giant map, and kind of, it was pretty indestructible. And I mean, way back then in my day, but like young and like then, like punk and hardcore wasn't as prevalent as it is now. So like you like go to the middle of town and like follow the weirdos and they'll bring you to the venue. You know what I mean? Like we'd be like, that guy's got, right. Or that person has an Avail shirt on. Chances are they're probably going to the show. Let's follow. Like, I mean, it sounds terrible now, but like at a safe distance, we never put anybody in danger or made anyone question whether they were safe. But like we'd be like, oh, they must be that way or whatever. And yeah, there was no GPS. There was no cell phones. Early aughts, I would like, my job was to, because I didn't drive, I would go into MapQuest and plot out every show from venue to venue. And I'd come out with like a book of the entire 30 shows or 35 shows.
It's crazy.
Like, from point to point.
And you're just, pulling up the piece of paper or a couple pieces of paper, the turn by turn to get you to where you're going next.
Right, you almost are like, well, we can't stay anywhere too far from the venue because then we're gone. Like we'll have to find our way back to the venue to just start from point A until we get to point B.
That's crazy. I started, so we're from Maine. I started going to out of state shows like with my group of friends, probably 02, 03.
Okay.
And I remember that was MapQuest. At that point in time, it was MapQuest.
Right.
There was
I mean,
no GPS.
you were living in the future
Right.
at that point.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
never mind. Like then you'd get GPS with like a giant box on you. Like now it's like you put on your phone, you can put wherever. But it used to be something like you have to like get the stick it on your dashboard. And even those people are like, wow, they're really doing well.
They're living. They're living high on
We
the
had
hog.
one friend that had it, and I was like, "How did you get this? Like,
You're like, what'd you do?
it was like $500, dude. Like, I don't,
Yeah, right.
you're
paying
18.
it all.
Like,
So where were the shows that you guys like? Did you guys go to Boston? Was that like the closest place, or Worcester, or
Massachusetts
Yeah.
and New Hampshire. For bigger size gigs, it was the Axis, the Avalon in Boston,
sure,
Palladium in Worcester. And then like local stuff was Dudley, Mass, all more like VFW stuff.
sure.
Placetown, New Hampshire, smaller venues. But I remember one time I got what I thought was the address to a venue. It brought me to this guy's house. It was at All About Records in, I forget the town in Massachusetts, but I think it was a record store, and then he had a venue there as well, combined.
Right.
So I remember getting the address. It was his mailing address to his parents' house. I thought it was the address to the venue. So my sister and I show up in this neighborhood. I'm like, is this a fucking basement show? And sure enough, it was the address to his parents' house. And the venue was miles away, but you couldn't pivot at that. I don't even know how we got there. And like thinking back, we didn't have cell phones. I didn't have a smartphone, certainly in 03.
Sure, yeah, of course. And we just figured it out. Yeah, I mean, I think, it said something for all the young folks that got to where they had to go. Like somehow we all made it.
yeah, right.
I don't know how, but we did.
And if you didn't, you had a cool story to tell about it, or you had a flat tire on the side of the road, and you're just trying to find a payphone to tone down people. Yeah.
You spent your nights at a Denny's or whatever.
Yeah.
It's fine. Whatever,
Were there metrics back then? So like if you played somewhere that you knew people showed up for the show last time, okay, let's book there again. We know how to get there. We know that people will show out. But if you were going somewhere new, were there like ways for you to figure out if it'd be a good idea to go to said town? Because I know nowadays you can like look at Spotify metrics, you can look at ticket sales last time, et cetera, et cetera. But back then, probably not a lot of that stuff going on.
No, especially during the 90s days, like it was sort of like, it was just, you go there and hopefully, there's enough people that like punk and hardcore that it'll just come out. Our metric was like, we would go to like the local, alternative record shop before the show and be like, oh, cool, they don't have our records. Like, so this is going to
That's the metric.
right. I'd be like, this is going to suck because, if it's like the punk and hardcore record shop that don't, like, we don't even have to divide it. We have nothing. Like, this is going to be a long night.
That's tough. Yeah.
That was the way of us telling you, like, this might stink. But otherwise, we were just sort of like, and it was like random places, like Birmingham, like Huntsville, Alabama. Awesome. But then we play a major city and people like couldn't give.
Wait, the Bible Belt loved you guys?
Yeah. It's surprisingly because I feel like we're like godless Northerners, sort of, for the most part.
Yeah.
And I think even if you believe whatever your beliefs are, like, it's not like, prevalent in your day to day, like every second of you. And in the Bible Belt, it's there all the time. So like people are like, we like this stuff.
Right.
Like, and this is going to be, yeah. And I think, it kind of worked out for us. Anywhere south of like Virginia was always awesome. That's
interesting because you wouldn't think that. I mean, just looking at it from the outside, you'd think there's no way that's going to play down there. But maybe there's a break. Maybe it's all right, I've had 23 hours of this. Give me the hour of not this.
Right. Or people are like, hey, I don't believe in this, but I don't know how to say it. And then it's like, oh, this band says it. Okay.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing now is like, I'll admit, I'm a daily visitor of the hardcore Reddit. Like I am. It is what it is. I don't post.
I am too. I'm not gonna lie.
Like why not? Yeah. And everyone posts all these gigs, like similar to the one that you mentioned earlier, where it's like all these bands. It would, the Botch, the Dillinger, you guys,
right.
It would literally draw thousands of people, and I think that's the narrative and thought process of most younger, probably people under 40. It's like these shows must have been fucking stacked with people. But what I've learned, just trolling the Bridge and Iron board for 20 years, whatever, that unless it was kind of like Strife, Snapcase, VOD at the PWAC, like unless it was that shit, it was a crapshoot.
Oh, absolutely. It was like the victory bands and like then everybody else. And sometimes it was awesome for bands. And sometimes it was like, this is terrible. Like, we're going to be playing for each other. Like, we've played places with like, oh, cool, we're playing with One King Down here. Like, this should be sick. And it was like, there's 25 people in a basement in Indianapolis or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, it was so hard to kind of tell. It wasn't nearly as big like as it is now.
Right.
Like,
Absolutely.
night and day, which is awesome. I'm stoked.
It's certainly, I mean, today it's all on the internet too. Like, I mean, that's a big piece of it is people, it's so hard to not know what's going on if you're paying attention at all. So back then,
for sure.
like, you just had to maybe roll into the record store and say, oh, this is the gig. Like, there was a whiteboard at our record store that had
Right, like a cork board
gigs
that
in
you
town.
pulled. Like,
Yeah.
right. How amazing is that? Like, that a flyer doesn't exist. I mean, they still do to an extent, but not like that was your only option back then. Which is cool because the artwork was cool. They were collectible. You know what I mean? You look back at them now, you're like, that was awesome.
The only gripe was they don't put the year on it. Like, I wish we had years. on flyers.
Nobody thought ahead to be like, is it like, so then you'd have to almost go to like Google and be like, all right, so Saturday, March 17th, March 15th, what day could have this have been? Like, and go back and be like, all right, so it was a Saturday in 1988, 1997, like whatever. Like, it's the only way to figure it out. It's super annoying.
I missed that whiteboard. Are you familiar with Bull Moose, Tom? Bull Moose Music?
Yeah.
Independent
Was that the spot that-
record store. Oh, we would in Portland. It was in a basement. It was so DIY. It was like our high fidelity, whatever. But
Right.
you'd go in right on the left, right, Tone? There'd be the whiteboard of
Right when you walked in. Yep.
releases and local music, local gigs and shows.
Right.
And that's how you'd find out. Either that or the Portland Phoenix, the publication.
Yeah.
Right.
And I
How
missed
cool is that though? Right? Like, just to be
it
like,
was
the best.
it felt like it was
Yeah.
just yours.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't. It was just like you were part of like a secret thing that no one else knew.
I equate it to getting mail now. Like I'm excited about that. There's that anticipation. It's like
Like, I got a
sweet,
record coming.
Henry Rollins spoken
Mhm.
word. Oh my
Mhm.
God, I'm in.
Right.
Well, and you're right. It's you had to again today. It's really hard to miss if you're paying any sort of attention to any
Sure.
sort of scene, right? You're gonna see if you're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you're gonna see show announcements all the time. But if you're in 1999, for us going into
Right.
the record store, that's the way to find out where the stuff was. And you'd hear maybe occasionally you'd hear bigger shows on the radio, but if you
Yeah.
weren't walking through the door, you weren't seeing what was playing at the Space that night, which is this
Right.
tiny little hole in the wall venue in Portland. So
Right.
love that stuff. Like I do miss those times. That's why we're doing this conversation now, obviously. But at the same time, it's nice to have all the info. But back then, you were in the club. It was your club.
Right. Yeah. And I think even now, like with all the stuff being online and stuff, it's so easy to like forget. Like, I go, oh crap, I should go to that. And usually I have to like screenshot it so I can remind myself that there's a show coming up that I want to either get tickets for or make sure that I get like whatever it is. Otherwise, because you're just kind of like flipping through to be like, oh, everyone's back to school. Oh, someone, like here's a show. Here's someone on vacation. It's so disposable. It's easy to kind of forget certain things.
Another thing I want to get your perspective on is as I look back at all the 90s flyers just over the last 20 years plus
Sure.
years, there's a shitload of mixed bills. And that continued into the 2000s. Absolutely. And it continues now. Like,
Yeah.
you can see, I don't know if this has ever happened, but you could see Citizen and Modern Life is War, and the audience, most of them will be into both.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
now
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like, but back then there's a shitload of mixed bills, but did it work? Was there a lot of friction? Like, because I look at these bills and I'm like, Equal Vision Showcase with like Saves the Day and then some heavy ass band. It's
Right,
like
it'd be like Converge and Coheed and
Exactly.
Save the Day and the Strider or like Fairweather. It's
at
like
CMJ, like I'm
Right,
seeing
right,
that
right.
classic CMJ lineup. And
Yeah.
I'm like, that's awesome, but did it work? Like,
I mean, I think for the most part, I think the stories are better than the shows from what I remember. Like
yeah.
there was always like a big one in New York that it was like Spaz and 97A and like a few other like grindcore like faster bands, and it was like Get Up Kids and Braid. And it was like,
Wow.
this is cool, but like the flyer was definitely made by a hardcore kid because it was like, Get Up Kids, I don't know, some bullshit emo from the Midwest. It was like so dismissive.
You know what that is now though, Tom? That's Outbreak Fest.
That is what
Yeah.
Outbreak.
It's
I mean, I
literally
think they
Outbreak
do.
Fest.
I think, LDB, like they all do such incredible jobs of like curating these, like, because you don't want, I mean, from however old you are, you don't want to be beaten down over, with heavy music the whole day.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think those kind of like, we're going to put on whoever, Koyo or American football or whatever it is, it kind of is like, oh, this is actually nice. Like this is a great way of kind of, it makes everything that much more enjoyable.
Yeah, it's we see these flyers and we're always like, oh man, it would have been awesome to be at that, but like, was it really? Like, were there people?
Was it that, yeah,
there were 35 people there, and 7 of them liked one band, and 8 of them liked 2 of the other bands. And were they getting along? Like, I think today people probably get along a little better with that stuff for the most part. But back then, it may have been tougher to see yourself liking all of the bands.
Yeah, or admitting it to yourself because you did. You know what I mean? But it was like, like it was then. It was like, well, I can't say I like Pearl Jam anymore.
Right.
But I can say I like
Farside.
Right, exactly. Or Sensefield or whatever. You can be like, those are like, sanctioned because they were on Rev or whatever. But I think now it's like a kid could go see Pain of Truth and whoever, like Pity Sex and be like, yeah, of course I do. I like them both.
Yeah.
But like when we were younger, it probably wasn't as kind of accepted. You had to be like, I like this and only this. I don't like pop music. I like New York hardcore and that's it.
Right.
I don't know the bullshit is. Yeah, it sucks. It sucks to be that way. But I was always a soft boy, so I always kind of liked what I liked. You know what I mean? Like, I might not have worn the shirt to the show, but I definitely like, I'd go home and listen to the Cranberries after like a Marauder show. It'd be cool,
But like that, we've heard that a few times, especially for people who either were part of creating and playing heavy music or just fans of the scene. It's okay to go back and kind of turn that off for a little bit and unwind and listen to something that's not gonna, like you said, beat you over the head for like.
I don't think it's healthy to listen to like
it's not
heavy, like whether it be metal or punk or hardcore and stuff. It's kind of like that can't be good for your like your brain functioning. I don't know.
It is for a short amount of time because it lets you get that stuff out and then let's do something else for a little bit and then come back to it when you need to get it out again.
Like you're not gonna put on like a Slayer record at 11:30 when you're trying to put the kids to bed. You know what I mean? Like there's a reason.
Right.
Like
Anthony, have you done that? Put the Slayer record on when you're putting the kids to bed?
There's Slayers for like babies, for like Slayer for children.
It's so funny you mentioned kids and Slayer in the same sentence. So in a meeting yesterday, and this is not bullshit, we were talking about children's books, and one of my son's favorite books it's the sequel to the Goodnight Moon book. Okay. And the book opens, and this is a book intended for 2-year-olds. It opens, the pages turn, the fire burns. That's how it opens. And a guy in the meeting goes, "Is that a Slayer lyric?"
Yeah.
Kevin said that. Kevin, you're a listener. I know you listen to this. So you said that, so enjoy that.
It's like an Easter egg for the adults. You're like, all right, okay.
Yeah.
Like, my kid's not going to understand this, but I get it. I get it.
So, Tom, I got to know.
Yes.
We were talking about mixed bills. How did the Indecision Beatnut show go over?
Terribly.
Of course it did. Who booked that? Like, how did that happen?
So it was a Doggy Dog. I don't know. You guys familiar with Doggy Dog at all?
Oh, let me tell you one thing. I was into hardcore before I knew it because I had play games as an 11-year-old. Our buddy Yanni, shout out Yanni, he gave it to me. His older sister liked them, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't know it came from where it came from. It was a Roadrunner record.
There were horns. It was cool,
Yeah.
They had played in Brooklyn that July, and it was like they played with Life of Agony, and they went over really, really well. So of course, booked them the next month. Has to work. And they wanted to book kind of like a show around them mixing hip hop and hardcore, and it was like us and like another hardcore band or two, and the Beatnuts and this band called the Bush Babies, who were like a big rap group in Brooklyn. And there was like maybe 50 people there. And Lemoore was probably like 600 cap or so.
Wow.
And Beatnuts at the time, like I loved that EP like a ton, and I was able to be like, rough night out there, huh, fellas? Like, it was kind of like, I'm here. We're both here. Like, I have a demo out. You have like you're on like a major label, but hey,
we're here.
We're all here. But yeah, it was cool just to be able to say, like it's another thing where the flyer kind of outpaces the show itself.
Yeah.
Did they play Work That Pole? No, I think that was later on.
That was later on. This was 95, so it was just like the EP. Yeah.
That's a wild story because there's no equivalent now, really. Like there really isn't. Like the absurdity of that show, you couldn't equate it.
It's all festivals now, and it's all when festivals. You see stuff together. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, in New York, we were lucky. Like there was like, like Public Enemy would play with like Anthrax, and it was like like there was like it was Burn I think it was KRS-One and somebody else. Like they do like mixed hip hop and hardcore bills, and it kind of worked. You know, like Onyx and Biohazard played, and that made sense. You know, I was always pushing to try to do it before he completely blew up an Action Bronson Indecision show. Just have two chubby bearded guys on stage and kind of work it out. But
that'd be fun.
He got way too big, you know, and I was like, never mind. You have a show on, like a cooking show. You're not going to play with a bunch of hardcore bands, so forget it.
And maybe we'll put the call out right now, right?
Yeah, Action Bronson, hit me up.
Did he do that Every Time I Die Fest?
Oh, the
I know Ghostface did one year. Yeah,
Ghostface definitely did
in Buffalo. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Tid the Season. I don't know if he did.
There it is.
That would actually make sense.
Yeah,
I don't know if he actually did, but yeah, he's always fun.
So Tom, in the late 2000s, I did a fanzine. It was called the Gilded City Fanzine. If I ever started a label, that's what I would call it. Don't steal it, anyone out there. But I did a whole segment in the zine about the 90s. Like I said, I've had this fascination with it. And I reached out to a bunch of people to get some like anecdotes and stories about the 90s. Rob Fisher, 108, Wrench, 10 Yard Fight, Larry of Think Fast Records, a bunch of dudes. And I reread it in anticipation for this convo. And Wrench said in the 90s, it was a big deal to do a full US tour. And I got to imagine that was the case. Like when you guys went out with Silent Majority and Millhouse, like that must have been a huge deal.
Yeah, I mean, we were out for, it was like 2 months straight. You know, and to be able to kind of like piece that all together and play like random places like, you know, like Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And it was, you know, it was just sort of like a bunch of shows in Texas and all this different sort of stuff. Yeah, like, 10 Yard Fight was clearly a bigger band at the time. So I'm sure they were a lot more successful in their endeavors back then. But like, you know, just to be able to kind of piece it together felt like kind of an accomplishment, you know, like, oh, we put this all together ourselves for the most part. And we were able to kind of, you know, where else would people, you know, 19 and 20-year-olds be able to like pack, you know, a road trip with like 14 of their buddies across the country, you know, have a place to play, a place to stay, people. You know? Yeah, exactly. Just us.
Well, and we were prepping for this. We talked about how that in the 90s, that did feel like an accomplishment. And then I said, I think in the early 2000s, it went away from being an accomplishment because everybody tried to do full US tours. And I think today, for different reasons, it's an accomplishment again, because you see a lot of bands playing 5-6 shows in a region, maybe as support, maybe in their own thing, and then, you know, back to the drawing board, put some time together, put some money together to go do it in a different region. It just doesn't happen full US for, you know, bands in that medium to, you know, up and coming spot anymore. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think now, like, we call it like the incendiary method, because like they got so popular and were able to kind of write their own ticket that they can be like, we're going to do a weekend in California. Like schmucks like us used to have to like drive out to California to do a weekend in California. They go, we're going to fly out on, you know, Friday morning, play Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, be in work on Tuesday, whatever, you know, and kind of be back to the families and all that sort of stuff. And I think that showing that's kind of like, that can work. You know, Mind Force does that. There's a bunch of different bands that are able to do that now. That like the tour that you may have needed to do to like, we're going to have to, you know, it's going to suck for 3 days, but then we get to Dallas or we get to Boston or we get to, you know, Los Angeles or whatever. You can cut out the stuff that's not as fun and just kind of get to the best parts. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. And what I can't help but think about is like, if the Weekend Warrior model, the Incendiary model, Mind Force model, if that existed years earlier, think of all the bands that would still be with us.
Right. That wouldn't have broken up in like a fist fight in a shitty band. Yeah.
Because they know that like, you don't have to be full time. You don't have to be.
Right. It didn't. It was all like all gas, no brakes. It didn't make sense to not do it that way.
Like, would Backtrack still be here? Like, you know, it's
right. Yeah. I mean, they were full road dogs. They were constantly going. But I mean, think about it, like Cruel Hand was out there forever, and Outbreak toured forever, and this like Outbreak would still be playing if they could play on the weekends. I would bet, if that was a thing.
It's funny. I thought about them today. And I would love to see another Outbreak. So I would fucking
fantastic. I mean, you watch those videos of like them at fests and stuff. It's like, oh, they got the best reaction to the whole thing every time.
Yeah. If anyone forgets how big of a moment they had, go on YouTube, type in Outbreak Posy numbers 04 or whatever. It's a swarm. It looks like a fucking bee infestation of people.
Right. They're all protecting like the queen bee. It's just like Ryan O'Connor's the queen. Like it's just tons and tons of people just piling on top of each other. I'm like, oh,
it's
it's the
unbelievable.
coolest.
Oh, fuck, I missed that.
But like, and it's not as easy to do that when you're our age at 35,
Right.
40,
Right.
45. When you're 20, you can be road dogs and play everywhere, play those tiny little hole in the wall venues,
Sure.
and then get to Dallas, and then play another 10 of them, and then get to Phoenix. But
Right.
now you can pick those, the Dallases and the Phoenix. As someone who lives in one of those tiny little hole in the walls, I wish a few more of them came our way. But we're starting to get more in our neck of the woods, which is cool. But
Right. I know there's like a Portland music
Yeah.
hall or something that Converge played there. Is that right?
Yeah.
yeah,
And there's more and more
Portland House
stuff
of Music.
happening.
They just played there. What? Geez, a week ago, Anthony. A little less
I
than a
had to
week
sell
ago.
my ticket. Kid was sick.
Oh no.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is past weekend because they did.
And Bane's
music.
playing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Bane's
I mean,
come through.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing. Like the venues kind of come and go, and as soon as you have a consistent one, people, because
It becomes
those
easier.
Weekend Warriors are looking to expand and not just do, Boston, Philly, and New York. They would love to be able to come to like Portland or come to, Mind Force just played Burlington, Vermont, and it was great. Like it was like, it behooves everyone for there to be a few places in every state that they can visit a couple times a year.
When they were Mind Force was here too, weren't they, Anthony? Not
Yeah,
that
They
long
play
ago.
Maine. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
Yeah, they played the Cavern, I think, and the Cavern's been getting shows, and that's been Terror's come through. Koyo came through. We've
Is that
had more.
Augusta? No.
No,
Is that-
Portland. That's right in
Oh,
Portland.
that's important too. Okay.
Yep, downtown. It used to be a it was a sports bar with like a mechanical bull and all that shit back in the day when we were in college and
Amazing.
stuff. And now it's just like a bar upstairs, food upstairs, and
Yeah.
downstairs is the venue, which is pretty cool. So
Oh, it's amazing. Very cool.
We had Brandon Chiappetti of Bleeding Through on a couple of years ago,
Toured it down too.
and we interviewed Brandon at the Tattoo the Earth Festival.
Right.
And he had a term for the Weekend Warrior. He said it's a vacation core. It's vacation core.
yeah,
And it's like,
It is.
yeah,
And
I mean,
it makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah, it's like a break from your day-to-day Monday through Friday 9 to 5. You get to like put on your uniform and get out there. But I mean, that's the same people that play softball on the weekends or go to
Yeah.
fantasy camps and shit. This is way cooler.
yeah. No, we could go to shows, and we're just on the other side of it, going to shows, being those people on the weekends. So
Hey, you know what? It's still cool.
All right. So we hit on touring shows.
Yes.
Let's hit on the scene in general. So I love myself some metallic hardcore, as we know now, metalcore. When that came on, and like I would put Indecision in there. There's metallic element there.
Right.
But like when Earth Crisis popped on and All Out War and Unbroken, like how was it received? Because a lot of what was going on was late 80s, early 90s youth crew stuff and all that.
Right.
And then when the metallic stuff comes in, are people in or are they like, what the fuck is this? This is metal shit.
Right. I think it was pretty there was a very like clear line of people being like, this is the coolest thing of it. Like when you the first time you hear Firestorm, you're like, it sounds like Slayer, but it's about like drugs. It's like, what the fuck? Like, it's the coolest thing I've ever seen. And then some people are like, this is not the punk and hardcore that I'm into. And it definitely kind of split things. It sort of has come back because like bands on like Unbroken and Integrity and stuff kind of pull from both sides of the aisle almost. But at the time, it was kind of like you liked metalcore, you liked hardcore, and very few people liked both.
same question, but post-hardcore.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of bands and people in some of those hardcore bands early
Right.
on went to the post-hardcore, side of the fence as they aged to do a little bit, to do something a little different, but
Sure.
still dip their toe into that heavy music side of things.
Right.
Like I feel like if you like hardcore, you also like a lot of post-hardcore.
Yeah, I think like band like Quicksand and like Orange 9mm and Into Another and stuff. I think people were just happy to still have those folks around and doing new things, And I think none of them did anything too egregious that like really put off hardcore people. You know what I mean? Like especially then, like I feel like they all kind of kept a lot of the same energy of hardcore and just was playing something, music that was completely different.
Well, and it got the label stamp too. Like it got the Rev stamp.
Right. They all started on Rev and then, kind of went their own directions.
But it's funny, like if I was into hardcore in the early 90s and I was like Encino Man putting Frozen Capsule when I woke up in 2024, I would probably be like, what the this isn't the same genre. You know what I mean? Like,
Right,
what
right. No,
happened?
of course. Yeah, and I think a lot of people are probably like, ugh, you know, like, you know, and I think, you know, there's older bands that come back now and see what's going on. You're like, they're like, you know, to us, it's like, oh, this is like standard. This is, you know, this is what hardcore is. But if I like, you know, last show I went to was, you know, Youth of Today in like 1989. I came back and it was like Tsunami or whatever. I'd be like, what am I? This is
Exactly where I
so
was
much
going.
different. Like you weren't there for like the kind of slow
The stair
gradation.
steps.
I was
Yeah,
gonna say
like-
stair steps. Yeah, that's
That's my-
Anthony's. And I was gonna bring up the
Podcast.
umbrella here in a second too. But like the hardcore scene itself, the umbrella has gotten bigger. I'm giving you mine now, Anthony. It's gotten bigger. More things fit under it than did probably 20, 30 years ago, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's like, you know, things that like was considered like Anthony was saying, like metalcore. Like now it's quaint as compared to what metalcore sounds like now. Like Unbroken at the time was like, this is like Slayer Part 2. Like, what are we doing here? Now it's like, oh, this sounds like hardcore as when you put it next to, you know, like fucking Jesus Piece or whatever, like what's also considered metalcore and
Yeah,
hardcore.
it's probably in the middle. Where in back
Right.
then it was an edge
So
case.
far. Right.
Yeah.
Now it's kind of like, no, this is like what this is what like quote unquote regular hardcore sounds like because it's gotten so extreme on both ends.
So you mentioned metalcore.
Yes.
When we had Jesse Leach of Killswitch on a few years ago at this point,
Yeah.
we talked about like the early days and Alive or Just Breathing era. And he brought up, he was like, yeah, metalcore was not a term, even in like 2000, 2001. So was the term metalcore a thing in 97? Or was
no, it was like moshcore,
metallic?
metallic hardcore, moshcore. Yeah, metalcore. Like it started probably post like early Killswitch, and then it sort of like became like a derogatory term at some point for a lot of people.
Yeah, deep into the Trustkill era, it was, I think that's when it started. 05.
Right, it was a good selling point. Right,
Yeah.
right.
It was a buzzword.
Yeah, and then it became like, it's like, oh, metalcore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which means like, oh, you don't have any fast parts.
And now I hear that term like, so on this podcast, we have a million PR companies pitching us shit.
Sure.
And
Maybe
we
a little
see
less than a million, but a few.
Like
Yeah.
999,000 at least, right?
and the stuff that gets labeled metalcore, I'm like, this is Linkin Park with a little edge. Like, what are we doing
Yeah.
here?
Yeah. Right.
Right, because it's become such a buzzword.
Bad omens. Bad omens.
Right.
What
like,
does that have to
there's
do
no
with
core
integrity?
about this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you know, I think because people, I think, see like bands like, you know, like Knocked Loose and stuff having such a moment, but it's like, oh, no, like all the people in that band actually listened to Dyed in the Wool hardcore. They came from hardcore and were like DIY for as long as they possibly could be until they were too big. They couldn't do it themselves,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah. Another
You know what I
massive.
mean? So like, I feel like it all kind of, those bands like, you know, Jesse, like with Killswitch stuff, like they were all in punk and hardcore bands coming up. So it's like, that makes sense. But like you said, now it's just kind of like, you know, it's a buzzword and you have some mosh parts and like, oh, they're metalcore. It's like, there's no hardcore to this whatsoever. Like they don't know, they've never listened to Minor Threat, whoever, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
but whatever it is, you know?
I guess and this is a question I asked Anthony yesterday when we were getting ready to talk to you. Do we overlabel shit? I think that's what it comes down
Oh,
to.
like the genres are like so stratified
It's
and crazy
insane.
that it's like, you know, and I mean, part of it's like fun. You know, it's like, oh, it's like demo core, it's basement core,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
door guy core, it's this, it's hilarious. just to
Vacation
kinda,
core.
right? Whoever can come up with the dumbest name to like, but it's so stratified now that it's like, which is funny though because I feel like more people are more open minded than they've ever been. So like, the genres don't matter, but they're still kind of talking points for so many of us. Which
Well, the thing is, they do serve a purpose. So, like, I worked college radio in the
Sure.
mid 2000s, and that's when deathcore started. That's when the first time Job for a Cowboy, Animosity, Suicide Silence,
Right.
all those bands. But like, that's how I know them, deathcore. You know what I mean? Back then, I was like, what the fuck are we talking about? But now, 15 years removed, it's like, okay, yeah, that's how I would refer. I don't know how else I would refer to them.
right, because that's a very specific, like what do you call like crime and stereo, for example? Like, are they melodic hardcore? But like, are they just a hardcore band? Are they
Hardcore
Long
punk,
Island core?
Yeah.
right? I mean, the more recent stuff is probably more post-hardcore. It's not as
Yeah. Yep.
not as like Gorilla Biscuitsy as they used to be. Now it's more, you know, like, so it's hard to, you know, yeah. But I think, you know, people love to kind of put things in boxes and try to figure out like the best, you know.
Yeah, and it's not just hardcore; it's everywhere, right? It's all genres of music.
Yeah, and I get it because it's like, how do I sell this to this person? Even if you're not selling it, if it's like, give me the elevator pitch why I need to like Chapel Roan or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you
good
know,
point.
like to,
Yep.
you know,
Can I give you the worst one?
yes.
This one actually like makes me itch. New gaze. NU gaze.
Yeah. New metal and
it's
shoegaze.
like-
Yeah.
Right.
It's
So
Deftones
it's people
worship.
that like Deftones.
Yes.
pretty much.
And I do. I'm
Exactly.
one of them. But
I love
this
Deftones.
shit is like,
Yeah.
what are we doing?
Yeah. It's like, oh, you like Deftones and Hum, and now it's New Gaze.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Those two
I mean,
had
it's
a
like-
baby, as
Yeah,
they
right,
would
right.
like to do. Yeah.
I mean, it's like when neighborhoods pop up and you're like, we call this Soho, or you know, and it's like, oh, you're just smashing letters together now, just so you can have like, you know, like, oh, you live in Sopo, I live in Sopo, you know, or whatever, Nopa, like some bullshit.
I
We're
do live
actually
in
from
Sopo.
Sopo. Yeah.
I do live
Is
in
that actually a
Sopo.
thing? I made that up.
South
is that
Portland is Sopo to a
maybe,
lot of
baby.
people. Yeah.
Sopo.
Oh, so
And
okay.
that's where we grew up.
Oh, that's no disrespect. I thought I was making it up. I really like Soho, like south of Houston. It's like, all right, fuck off.
No disrespect taken, and it's just amazing that you said Sopo because we're from Sopo.
That's pretty fun. I thought it was like, oh, Sopo, no, because it was like South Portland doesn't roll off the tongue like Sopo does.
No,
whatever.
it doesn't.
What about Hey Ho Core, like Lumineers? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a bald guy in it. Yeah, right. You know, the what was that band? The brothers that weren't actually brothers. What the fuck? The Sons. Mumford and Sons.
Mumford and Sons. Yeah,
You know, they were definitely had some punk parts to them or
they
something.
were Ho Hey Core. That's exactly what they were. Yeah.
So speaking of Mumford, they're obviously in it to make a living.
Yes.
Back in the 90s, was there such a thing of making a living playing hardcore? Because nowadays, I mean, there are bands that's what they do. Is it a great living? Who knows? I don't know the metrics, but back then,
I mean, I think there were certain bands like we talked about, like the Strifes and this. I mean, like it depends on where you lived.
yeah.
And I think, you know, like, all right, like the Sick of It Alls of the world, like, yeah, no, they were probably, you know, clearing six figures in the 90s. Like, they probably made a decent living. Like, they made a good life for
Wow.
themselves.
In the
I would
90s?
imagine.
Ooh. Yeah.
But then there are other bands, it's like, oh, yeah, like, we make a living. Like, our living is our band, but it's like, all five of us live in a punk house in fucking, you know, Duluth, whatever. You know what I mean? They're like,
It's not sustainable.
right. It's not like you're not putting
You're not
money.
going to retire off it, certainly.
No. And I think, you know, certain bands did it. Hatebreed did it for a while, you know, obviously, and still do it. But I don't think they were, I mean, like, on our tours and stuff, like, I would go to the bank and take out money for the rest of the summer because I knew I wasn't going to make any. You know, ATMs weren't everywhere. I'd be like, I either have cash in my pocket or I'm not getting Taco Bell that night. So sort of, there was no delusion of kind of making it into a career.
I love stories like this because we had, do you know 4 Year Strong?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
We had Dan and Alan from 4 Year Strong on a couple months ago, and we were talking about like the first gig that they got paid, like the first gig where they actually got money. It was $8 split across two bands.
Yeah.
So they basically got like, hey, here's enough for like a Taco Bell taco. Thanks
You
for
can make
playing.
a phone call if you don't have a tone down.
Thanks for coming.
Right. Like, you're not all going to, like, one of you guys might have to burp in the other guy's face because he's not going to be able to eat tonight. But yeah, I mean, even like that Sound Majority tour that we talk about, like, the joke was like, we played like, I don't know, 50 shows or something. We had like, quote unquote, a guarantee, which was like, I think it was $500 for 3 bands.
You had a rider too.
Yeah, we did like No Brown M&M, like, you know.
Yeah.
We got paid what we were meant to get paid once.
Wow. Yeah.
From June till August, we got paid what we were supposed to pay once because we played at University of California, like either Riverside or Davis. And it was like, well, they have money because it's a school. So it was like part of like the arts budget. And it was the only time we got paid exactly what we were expecting. Every other time it was like, we can do like $250. And it's like, no, of course, like we don't, you know, like $500 would be great because then we could like stay somewhere. But like, we know it's only fair that we don't, you know, we're not asking people to pay us that something that didn't come in the door, you know?
Well, and you're not going to stay there, right? And be like, no, we're staying here till you give us the money you told us you're going to give us.
We're going to walk you
the
to
next
like,
show.
to the bank. No, it's like, oh, all right. That sucks, but I get it.
It's funny. The college budget is a thing. I worked for when I was back in undergrad, I worked for the committee that booked shows. And I remember seeing the list of like, those websites where you could see like what bands got.
I remember those.
And it was elevated. It was like Uber Eats. You know how it's elevated? Like,
yeah,
it's the surge pricing.
Right. I remember, I was obsessed with that website. I forget what it was. It's like, well, if you want so-and-so, you can get them for $50,000. Like, $50,000.
Oh, yeah.
But like, yeah, like the college radio, like, because they had just funding based for the arts or whatever. And it would kind of be like, X band might get $1,000 a night, but if they play wherever, they can get $7,000, like, just because they got to pay, they got to spend through it for the fiscal year or whatever, and it kind of worked out to the band's benefits.
Yeah, that money was earmarked a year prior or 9 months prior. So like,
right. So you're like, I guess we're overpaying for somebody. Like, this is cool.
Yeah, take advantage of that. I wish. I mean, that's a pretty cool and not a thing I think I'd ever thought of until just this moment. So that's wild.
Yeah, it's pretty. It was awesome.
We booked the starting line. They were on Drive Through Records. Then went to a major. Then went to Island. But we booked a buddy's band to open for them. A Loss for Words.
Oh, I remember. Of course, Maddie.
Yeah, Maddie.
I've met him over the years. Yeah, of course.
And I know what we paid them. And I don't want to quote off the record, but it was probably more than they typically got. Let's say that.
Right, because you had the flexibility, like whether one person showed up or 1,000 people showed up, you're like, I have this money.
Yeah, it's there. Yeah.
Right, so this is for you. Like, somebody's tuition money is going back to Philadelphia tonight because,
It's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Oh, no, it's awesome. And those kind of helped, like, fund, like, the less populated shows and stuff. Like, so have those every once in a while, like, huge helps.
All right, so this is one thing I've always wondered about. Yes. So, like, Sick of It All, open for Korn. Murphy's Law, open for Beastie Boys. How was that perceived from the scene? Because now, I fast forward 25 years later, it's celebrated. Knocked Loose playing Knotfest with Slipknot. I'm in. Good for those guys. They earned
Everyone's stoked.
Everyone's stoked.
Yeah.
Like if Tsunami got an opening spot for a huge, a big metal band, I think everyone would be in. Everyone from the hardcore, I think they'd be supportive. So how was it back then?
Yeah, I mean, the Beastie Boys were kind of an outlier because they were always like sort of around, and like even as big as they all came from the right scene. Like they grew up with Murphy's Law, so it only kind of made sense. Like I don't think anyone was kind of looked at it sideways. That was before my time, but like Sick of It All took Korn out on Korn's first tour.
Oh, it was the reverse.
It was the reverse, and Korn never paid them back. Never, like once they hit the arenas, never looked out for Sick of It All after that. But it was the first tour. It was Korn, Orange 9mm, and Sick of It All.
I remember that Orange 9. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, I'm trying to think, like there were other bands, like I think it kind of depended, because I think like some bands were like, we're going on tour with like Papa Roach, and people were like, like that was like a bridge too far.
Well, let me ask you this: when VOD and Earth Crisis went to Ozfest, was that like, oh fuck that, sellouts? Like when Slither dropped, was everyone like, what's going on?
Yeah, I think everyone was kind of like, so we lost them. Okay, like like it was like that
one that got away.
Yeah, I was like, well, they had a good run for us. Like, and again, like you can't like, you can't begrudge people like making a living out of doing something they love.
Exactly. Yeah.
Even when you're young and still like, even then you kind of be like, you know what, like I mean, like VOD never pretended to be anything more than they were. Like so like when they, they were from the get go, they were like, oh, this band is like put together and professional and sound incredible, and the EPs, the demos, everything was great. Like they would be doing them a disservice by having like punk rock guilt, and I don't know if they actually ever did. They were never like, we're the DIY punk band. They were like a fucking metalish band that was playing hardcore shows until they weren't. And I don't think anyone like begrudged them that. I think Earth Crisis is like the combination of like them going to Ozfest and like Slither not being what people wanted to hear from them probably hurt them more than people being. I mean, you got to think like, if I'm going to, Ozfest to see fucking, I mean, I don't even know who's on that back then. Fucking, Mudvayne or something.
Yeah.
Like some weirdos talking about like veganism. If you like turn a couple of people, like that's kind of awesome. Because like, guess what? That guy at the Mudvayne show probably would never heard of veganism until you said it. So if you convert some, you know what I mean? And I'm sure a lot of people that was their first shows, and like they see Hatebreed, they see Earth Crisis, they see these bands, and it's like, then they're going to come to the next local show. They see Hatebreed on a flyer, and like, or like, in like the local music trade or whatever. You're like, oh, I'll go to that. I saw them last summer and they were awesome. It's kind of the price you pay if you want to be able to kind of, make your scene, have it grow over the years.
Yeah. Well, and you may alienate some people that who cares that you're going to do it, but at the same time, you're getting that exposure that will maybe get people to come back to, the smaller venue show when you come through.
Right. I mean, I think, like seeing like, Knocked Loose out there with Slipknot, it's like they belong there. They get reactions, but they belong there. So like, what am I going to be mad that they're not playing a fucking VFW hall? Like, no, hey, you know what? Like, because they pay it back. You know what I mean? Like they always pay it forward. The next time they're on tour, like they're taking out Drain, they're taking out Military. It's like, they don't have to do that. they do that because they love punk and hardcore. Like that's where they're doing it. They've had hardcore bands. Like we got Indecision got invited. We got to play their record release show in Louisville for the last record. It's like they didn't need us fucking dumbasses. Like they didn't need to fly 5 adults to Louisville to play their show, but they did it out of like because they thought it would be cool and they liked our band and it was like, you know, we all got along, you know. So it's like you can't begrudge people that like kind of do that and then come back and kind of help spread that into like
back.
You know what I mean? I think
absolutely.
that's fucking. I think that's fantastic.
I mean, let's be real. Did that add ticket sales? Maybe for a few people, but like they didn't have to do that.
No, I mean they had us and Mind Force down, you know, and before Mind Force really took off, and it was like they didn't need to do that. Like they came out of pocket pretty, like they paid extra money just to be able to fly us there. Like they could have gotten some band from Louisville and not paid, you know, nearly as much to fly somebody out, and they did it anyway, which is, you know, like I can't, you know, I think that's fucking fantastic.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, it's fascinating. I remember we had Brendan Garone of Incendiary on.
It's my buddy.
He was talking about VOD, how like they kind of like extended beyond the scene from the get-go. I remember, Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he said like your uncle who was a mechanic knew about VOD, you know, like
and especially on Long Island. It was
on
like
Long Island. That's what
they
he's
were
talking
just
about.
like a phenomenon, like unlike anything we had seen at the time. I always tell like, so their record release show for the first 7 Still record was at the place called the PWAC, which is like this just big like industrial place where they'd have shows. That it was the offices for the AIDS charity that somehow would rent this giant space to hardcore kids on the weekends and stuff. Like they had their office, they had all this unused space, so they set up a state, all this sort of stuff. And it was Madball and VOD as like for this 7-inch record release, not like this giant thing. It's a 7-inch, like how you know. And a bunch of us drove out from Brooklyn. I'm in line, and like the line is like around the, you know. And I knew some of the people that put the show on. They literally went through the line and picked out like their friends and were like, "Your security, yours." Like they were overwhelmed.
Wow.
It was like 20. Yeah, I was like, I just wanted to pay $10 and see VOD. Like, but anyone that they knew from other bands and stuff, they're like, "We need help." They're like overturning porta potties. There's 2,300 people here. We were not ready for this.
Wow.
So they were just kind of their own thing. That like,
Yeah.
You know, a big show would be 600 people, but VOD was like its own fucking entity. It was incredible.
Yeah, that's shit. So how do bands in the 90s or really, I mean, any time, late 80s, early 90s, 2000 make it? How do you get to that level out of the blue? Like, how do you find out that you're popping off to that level like back then?
Yeah, I mean, I think they were just kind of like so new and so fresh, you know, and like having Roadrunner behind you helps for sure, like, and getting you on the right tours and all that sort of stuff. They played a ton of shows, and like I think they were a band that like everybody in our area liked. So it was kind of like, you know, no matter what kind of hardcore you kind of usually gravitated to, everyone liked VOD. And it was so different then that I think they just really stood out. And I think, you know, they worked hard, and then they just started touring, doing bigger tours, and you know, there's like the legendary, like they opened for Korn and like blew Korn off the stage on Long Island. Like, so it was kind of like they were like bound to be legendary just because they just had a certain thing. You know, Tim's got like this voice. Like now I feel like people kind of overlook it, but at the time you're like, this dude sounds fucking insane. And the singing, screaming thing was not nearly what it is now.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know, and like for him to be able to scream and actually kind of carry a note. Like I was like, I've had talks with Jesse Leach about that. I'm like, I don't know how you guys do this.
Oh,
it's insane.
Melting out like these
Jesse's
notes.
a freak, yeah.
You know what I mean? And Howard, all those. It's like, how do you? I get one or the other, but you're shredding your voice, and then you're able to like hit these like angelic. Like I don't understand. That doesn't compute. You know, and in 1994, 1995, Tim doing that was like pretty out there. You know what I mean? And I think there's a ton of bands that you go, this band's gonna make it, and they don't for whatever reason. I think it's just like a lot of it's, you know, it's a lot of it is quality, and a lot of it's like luck of the draw. You never know.
Yeah, big piece of it is luck of the draw.
You know what I mean? It's like you know, I'm sure we all have records that we listen to. You're like, how wasn't this band the biggest band on earth?
Yep.
And then in some bands, you're like, this band's the biggest band
out on this.
Yeah. Yeah,
and you know what?
We've talked to some of those bands.
They're the ones that are typically down to chat.
Really? Yeah. And I think, but it's also like, even on like the podcast that we're always kind of worried, like, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. and say
Absolutely.
like, you're the band that
100%,
didn't
Tom.
make it. You're like, oh, cool. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, yeah.
it's such like a fine. So usually if we're ever going to say that, it's about bands that'll number one, never hear it and aren't around anymore. We would never want to be like, and that last such and such record was disappointing. Because people get their feelings hurt. Nobody wants to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, like that's not what we're going for.
We're nearing down the end here. Let's talk labels here. So I would say my era was 2000s. Like I was a Bridge 9 board guy.
Sure.
I liked everything Trustkill, EVR, all those bands, 1917, Rivalry. Like that was,
Yeah, of course.
Amazing Core, whatever you want to call it. That was my era. And there was overlap with like fans of those labels. There was overlap, but like a B9 kid was very different from a Trustkill kid, was very different from a Jade Tree kid.
Oh yeah.
So I can't help but think, like in the 90s, was there a divide? Like, was a new age kid a Victory guy as well, or like a Rev? Like, was like a Rev like the weirdo in the corner?
No, I think like the more kind of like dyed in the wool hardcore kids were like Rev, EVR sort of to a point because they had like 10-yard fight and they had floor punch. And
Yeah.
I think Victory was kind of like they were always sort of like the evil empire.
Were they back then though?
Yeah.
You heard so here's the thing. I had a buddy that worked when I worked college radio. I won't say names.
Sure.
I had a buddy that worked there doing like the college promo stuff.
Sure.
Harassing me to chart Ringworm high on CMJ charts, you know?
Right.
And I heard stories then, but like I didn't know it existed in the 90s.
Yeah, I think they were looked at like, like the Snapcases, Earthquake, like they were all like, oh, they're like, it's almost like you're on a major label. You're not punk and hardcore, like.
I take that back. We knew it from Thursday. Tony and I knew it from the Thursday era. That there was shenanigans. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that band like fucking deserves the world. And like, I know how, them and like Hawthorne Heights and stuff, like, oh, you had to sue to get like anything. But even then, like, even before we knew all the the backroom machinations of, they were always kind of like you're hardcore, but like not to me personally, because I was a Victory dork, but like for a lot of hardcore people are like, yeah, this is too big. This is almost like you're on a major label. And bands would get, I think Bob tells a story of like Strife, like there was a shirt because Strife asked for $1,000 for a tour on tour at some show, and like someone made a shirt like $ for the S, and it's like,
oh geez.
This band was drawing 600, 700 people when everyone else was drawing 100 people. Like
they were getting $1 a kid. What do you want?
They're definitely $1,000 in the till, 100%. Like no one was like having to walk to like borrow money from their mom. Like everyone had money. It was fine. But I think they were always kind of like frowned upon from like the global hardcore sense.
I got one more to land us, unless you got one, Tone.
No, go for it.
All right. At this point of recording, we're 25 years removed from the 90s, which is nuts. Insane. I can't.
The late 1900s. That's what the young kids say now.
Yeah.
Oh, you were born in the. Yeah, I went to school in the late 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
It's true, but like I don't want to hear it.
What's the biggest difference? And is it for the better or worse?
I think the biggest difference in general is access.
Oh yeah.
To music. Like we all know times like when we were younger, it's like, oh, that record is out of print. I don't know what that band sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
I can't. There's no like unless you have an older sister or a friend or a family member or whomever that may have that record. There's some old punk and stuff that you didn't get to hear.
That's insane to me. As someone that grew up in the record store era,
right?
But it wasn't like Bull Moose had great distro, but it wasn't. Yeah, I wasn't getting like SoCal punk niche.
Yeah, there was
shit.
a lot of stuff that did not make it to our neck of the woods. Right.
Now you go. I want to hear what TSOL sounds like. You just go and click on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which I think is wonderful. I think that like kind of like barrier of entry, there was some good to that because you felt like you had to sort of work to figure it out. And it was like, you're part of like this like underground society and community that you're like, I buy this Earth Crisis record and I look at the thank you notes and they mention this band. So I'm going to try to find that. It was like almost like a puzzle and you put it together. And when you get there, you're like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
But now, like, you think of how like, there'll be times like I'll get like my, like, here's what you listen to in 2023. I'm like, I listen to this? Like, 'cause I might've listened to it 2 weeks straight and I never listened to it again.
Yeah.
Pop song, whatever it is. Like, it's like, oh, I got an earworm because I want to hear, whatever's, dopey song, but I think like the access makes it awesome because you have the world literally at your fingertips, which is cool. But I think that barrier of entry and that kind of like you had to hustle a little bit made it pretty awesome. And I think access to like you have access to band. Like I never like talked to somebody from. I would be at shows with New York. I never talked to Madball. I went to see Madball 100 times, but I never was like, "Hey, fellas," like or whomever. You know what I mean? Like I didn't know Sick of It All until we toured with them. But now you can be like, "I'm going to tweet so and so. I'm going to add so and so on Instagram," and now you have like a weird relationship. Sometimes they become real friends. Sometimes parasocial, like whatever. But I also think there's so many bands that like all there's a bunch of like bands from the Hudson Valley that are like pals with people in Scotland, and like they're like have like friends bands in all these different places that like didn't exist in the 90s. You know what I mean? Like I met a bunch of people that I'm still friends with now, but like I wouldn't have known them if I didn't get to tour there, or in the UK or wherever, that I still see today. And it's like, hey, but now like that has grown exponentially, that people are never meeting in person, but know 17 bands across the world that they may meet once. So I think the access, the biggest thing. I mean, I think for the most part, it's good. I mean, I think, in terms of like touring and all that sort of stuff and just kind of getting the word out there, I think that kind of like the hustle that we all used to have to do to kind of learn about like this weird underground society, like didn't have books. Now there's like everything is kind of like I can get punk books and hardcore books. Like that didn't exist.
It's all out there. Yeah.
Right. It's made for us now because we're all adults that are like, I'll buy a book that has every fanzine that I liked as a kid in a book. Like, hell yeah, I'll do that. Because I feel like we like that ephemera, but like, then it was just sort of like, you had to almost figure it out for yourself. And I think there's some benefit to that.
Yeah. You grabbed something at a show and you just hung on to it for 25 years. And we're those guys. Right. We hung on to all that stuff and like parse through it and use it for content today, never thinking that's what we were going to do with it when we kept it. But we kept it because we liked it. And you had to like find the bands you liked and go see the bands you liked and pick up their t-shirt that you had for 25 years, pick up their, flyer from the show and keep it.
Right. You bought some records because the cover was cool and you never listened to it again. You're like, that was a waste of X amount of dollars. Like, I'll never go listen to it. You know what I mean? It's like,
heard the single and the rest of it sucked.
Right. They got me. But the cover was cool too. Like, I thought this would be awesome. It's like, oh, this sucks. But yeah, I think that, for the most part, I think it's great. And I think it's made it more global and more inclusive to a lot of folks. But I think I do miss the kind of the work that went into being part of it. Cause like you'd see somebody on the street and be like, yep. Me and you, buddy.
I always equate it to Fight Club. Like,
right.
At some point, Fight Club loses the luster. If I'm at work and like, there's like the Edward Norton scene in the movie, but like at some point it jumps the shark. Like it loses the reason why you got in. And I wasn't around the 90s, but if I compare it to the 2000s, to me, I don't know if it's worse or better. It's just different, To me, as someone who grew up, this is going to be a weird tangent. When Life is Peachy came out from Korn in 96, that was the edgiest shit 10-year-old me had ever heard.
Right.
And I would say that was more niche then than a lot of the big hardcore bands now. And I think a lot of younger people don't acknowledge that and appreciate it. But like it's less rare and it's less Fight Club and less niche now. And is it better or worse? I don't know. But like it's just tough. Like if you were in the club back then in the 90s, it was so small. Like you were
even
one
the
of
early aughts,
1,000.
Right. And let's be realistic, even like the early 2000s, like probably the 20, up to the 2010s and 20, like it wasn't that easy to find out. Like, you know what I mean? Like it got bigger. But like, Bleeding Through was huge. But like I always go like, would my mom know who Bleeding Through was? No, she'd be like, I think I watched that shirt. Like, but like now it's kind of like we played with Gorilla Biscuits once, and my mom goes, "I washed a shirt. I remember them. Like when you were a kid, you had a Gorilla Biscuits shirt, so I remember who they were. Like that's, you know what I mean. But like, I think that's kind of like where it's at. That it's sort of like, it's not this weird niche thing anymore. Which it's different for people, and
it's different. I think that's the big thing. It's like, who's to say if it's better or worse? Like there's people like you that were around for both. Right. You have a perspective, but it's tough to say. I mean, I don't know. The shows, like Tony and I saw Bane, what it was, this summer at Roadrunner?
A year ago, last June, but we saw
the first
Have Heart
comeback.
this summer.
The first comeback show. That was
Right.
the best time I've ever seen Bane. Full stop. And when I saw Have Heart, we saw Have Heart at Roadrunner, the same thing. Best time I've ever seen them. So like, maybe it is for the best, you know?
Right. I mean, I've been to shows where there's 17 people, and I've been to shows where there's 1,700 people. I'd rather go see the 1,700 people.
Yeah.
It's way
the
more fun.
energy
The
in the
energy is different. It's like, I've been to a lot of shows that I'm like, I know how much this sucks for you to be up there and having no one give a shit. I'd rather have everyone be able to play shows where everyone gives a shit.
Yep. Oh man.
That's a good mic drop right there. I like that.
Man. I want to keep going, but I want to respect our guests
and your
my
editor
wife.
who has to have this done by next Wednesday because we're going to Detroit for a wedding.
Oh, wow. Okay. They'll be busy.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. No, this is great, Tom.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
It's a blast, man. We'd love to do this again with you on another topic or something. You know, dive deep. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if me and Bob can come on, even if you want. I don't know if too many people.
Oh, you're
but,
signing
like,
Bob up. Get Patrick on it. Have it be a collabo.
I mean, I could barely get Patrick to sign up for stuff he gets paid.
I know.
no, we would definitely that would be great. We'll do that.
Yeah, because we have such divergent, you know, and he's booked so many. I mean, he booked those half hour shows. He's kind of been involved in all that sort of stuff. So like, started Sound of Fury. So he's been around.
Cool. Well, we appreciate talking with you tonight. And
absolutely, thank you so much. I appreciate
we'll do it
it.
again.
Yeah, please, anytime you let us know.
Love this.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to Podioslave. We are at Podioslave on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all of the places that you can find us on social media. Facebook, Podioslave Podcast. YouTube, Podioslave Podcast there. Email us at podioslavepodcast@gmail.com. And hey, if you want to become a supporter, click on the link at the bottom of the episode and give us $1, give us $5. It keeps the lights on, keeps us going. We really appreciate that stuff. Thank you.
I love that we just like, you've just had like 2-sentence prompt of this episode. We have a whole plan for it, but you have no fucking clue.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'll do okay. We'll see.
Oh, you'll be
No,
fine.
you're the
you'll
guy.
be fine.